get to our guest, Devan Rajadurai, founder and chief investment officer at Malayan Traders Capital. Now, Devan, I want to start with your fairly contrarian view. When you look at your portfolio, the sector breakdown, you've given resources, that's energy and other hard commodities like iron ore and coal, 19% allocation. Now, given the fact that you have funds in Norway, for example, shifting from energy to other types of sectors, why do you still feel confident about this?
See, when you look at resources are broken down into three parts. One is the upstream, one is the midstream, one's the downstream. So it's as you see all prices collapse, commodity price collapse, of course the upstream players are going to be hit. But the midstream players, if we're looking at oil has to be moved from one spot to another spot. Gas has to be moved from one spot to another spot. So they will always get their cut. And so if you're looking to invest, midstream players stock prices has been hit, but they've probably been hit too much for the cash flows they're generating for the investors.
So you have to look at geographic breakdown. Where are you finding the opportunities?
The opportunities depends on the country, but we see a lot of opportunities in America because America has about every type of resources player you could find. If you're looking in Malaysia, maybe you will get a lot of upstream players, and maybe one or two downstream players, but not many to select from. So you really have to look. America will be a good place to look for oil and gas and even mining. If you're looking at agriculture, which is another type, it's agriculture, but it's related to resources, that will be Singapore, Southeast Asia, yeah.
So how would you view Sapken's latest contract wins? How would you view Sapura Kencana's latest contract wins in terms of their area that they play in?
Yeah, so the thing with contracts, and we don't really read too much into it because it's not something that is predictable. We prefer to look at companies like, let's say, a Petronas Dagangan, which is always consumers are going to the pump and then filling up petrol. With contracts, you could get some good contracts this year and it would be great, but then I'm not sure what Sapura Kencana is doing next quarter.
Okay.
So it's very hard for us to evaluate that.
Now, you touch on agriculture. Now, there's a little bit of consternation when it comes to the demand around the soft commodity space, but you're focusing on food being, the area where there's still going to be demand, of course. Taking a look at, for example, ChemChina's buy of Syngenta. That's China making a play for food. So how are you viewing this space?
Yeah, we think the food and agriculture is basically a long-term bull. Just because commodity prices have come down and oil and gas prices has come down, is impacted. Somehow everything seems correlated and everything has come down. But if you really look at it and you look at palm oil, for example, now you have El Nino problem. So in the short term, you're looking at there being a shortage. And then the population is growing all the time around the world. So food is the only thing that is a real consumer staple compared to oil and gas, etc. So that's why we're long-term bullish on agriculture.
Now, as Jackie pointed out earlier when we were talking about the trade performance in December, we saw that palm oil exports, there was a decline in the performance. And soybean oil, that's starting to rise in terms of the demand for an economy such as India, supplanting palm oil in some way. So how are you positioned in the soft space to really take advantage of that long-term dynamic that you're seeing?
So what you don't want to be doing is, what you don't want to be doing is picking certain types of food. So you don't want to be picking coffee beans, you don't want to be picking palm oil, you don't want to be picking soybean because there's too much intricacies to really understand the whole thing. So if you want to get your hands into agriculture, what you should be looking at is those big agriculture conglomerates. So companies in America like ADM, companies in, they call them, ABCV. So it's like ADM, Cargill, Bunch, etc. So in Asia, there's a new group now that control the agricultural space in the world, and they're called Now. So that's Noble, Olam, and Wilmar. Unfortunately, Noble sold their agriculture to China. So it's really Olam and Wilmar, and then you have China, of course, if I'm not mistaken, it's COFCO. So there are those players you want to look at, and you really want to pick, do your analysis and pick the best out of those big multi-grain or multi-agricultural players.
What are the traits you're looking for, though, when you're considering where to invest? The valuations, like what is it that you identify?
Yeah, so the main thing you look at is the valuations. Make sure that the cash flows are there. the cash flows is sustainable. And then the next thing is how much debt do they have on their balance sheet, and whether the cash flows, the current cash flows, can pay the interest payments. So a lot of these companies, if we look at the oil and gas, for example, there's question marks on whether they have negative cash flows, so they can't pay their interest payments. But we look at agriculture companies, a lot of them still can pay their interest payments.
Now, going back to the resource space, there now is a rising concern about corporate defaults there. You have banks in America setting aside funds to cover any losses in that space. So how then can you defend against that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's in a way the job of the bank to make sure that they give out the right loans. And at the end of the day, if that loans were to default, they have to make that relevant estimate, and they will be hit with bad debts. So there's nothing really the banks can do except to understand what type of business that they're lending to. And so then
but from an investor point of view, though, like when you're making a pick, for example.
Yeah. Sorry. Could you
so
repeat?
Given the corporate defaults that we can see on the horizon potentially, how then can you kind of avoid that when you're looking at resource picks?
Yeah. So as it goes back to my earlier point, you don't want to be picking a company that's highly indebted. That's one. And the next thing, you want to be picking a player more like a midstream player or a downstream player, where if you're looking at oil and gas. So for example, Warren Buffett recently increased his stake in Phillips 66, and they are a mid and downstream player. So in that sense, that's something that's going to be minimally impacted by the price of oil. No matter what, they're still going to get whatever cut they get.
All right, so the energy space, not a complete write-off. Thanks so much, Devin, for sharing your time, and happy Chinese New Year ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
That was Devin Rajadurai, Malayan Traders Capital Chief Investment Officer.